This is your World War III update. This is going to be one of my most high-level, comprehensive geopolitical updates where I try to integrate all of the current events data that I've amassed over the last 48 hours into one big whopper of an explanatory video. This is going to explain exactly what's going on in the world, exactly what you can expect next, okay? 2 weeks ago, I told you that the markets were going to crash. There was a very unique confluence of negative economic indicators that were converging around this point in time. Remember, I was in my car. You can go back and watch the video. I said there's a very high likelihood that it's going to crash this week, and sure enough, now we find ourselves below the 200-day moving average on the NASDAQ. We're seeing this descending staircase pattern, and I hate technical talk, but that's what it is. You see bull traps along the way. Okay, people are going to get caught in those traps. The one guy who ain't getting caught is the guy who has the patience of a Buddhist monk, and that's Warren Buffett, sitting on $350 billion US dollars, saying, I told you so, ready to buy like Baron Rothschild buys when the streets are running with blood. Okay, that's Baron Rothschild's quote, buy when the streets are running with blood. And that's what's happening right now, okay? So here's what's going down, guys. Trump is trying to say that this is the globalist conspiracy. Believe it or not, he actually said that the globalists are crashing the stock market. Now, is he telling the truth, or is he trying to find a scapegoat? Is he trying to evade responsibility for something that they're chalking up to being related to the tariff war? It's probably 50-50, believe it or not. There might actually be some truth to what he's saying, even though it seems as though like he's trying to pass the buck onto somebody else. The reality is there's a lot of whales who perhaps don't agree with Trump. There's a lot of foreign investment in the U.S. economy that might be divesting, especially from Europe, who are now investing in Europe's rearmament to the tune of $1 trillion in order to now go to war with Russia. You even have Meloni today, the Italian prime minister, saying that they want to bring Ukraine under the Article 5 wing, which is insane. But we're going to get to that in just a moment. But he's not entirely wrong, okay? He's not entirely wrong. What you need to understand with the world right now is that there's really only two big gangs. There's the globalists and there's the jingoists, okay? There's I guess you can call them the imperialists, the regional imperialists, regional colonialists. What is Trump doing? He's going after what? Canada, Greenland, Mexico. He's shoring everything up in the American continent, the Panama Canal, okay? And so when you are ceasing in your ability to project power around the world in a way that you could throughout the 20th century, where you excelled in military expediency and deploying expeditionary forces and policing the maritime corridors around the world, facilitating a global trade, typically in your interest, fighting proxy wars, keeping other peer competitors' spheres of influence contained. No longer does the United States have the ability to do that entirely. So it has to delegate some of that responsibility to Europe. That's where Trump comes in. And that's where the establishment needed Trump to come in, because he needed them to basically get Europe to start pulling its weight with respect to this going to war with Russia thing, because this is a world war. The United States is going to be tasked with containing China and what's going on in the Middle East, but their proxy, Israel, is kind of going to be the front man for that operation, whereas Europe is now going to be tasked with dealing with the Russians. So that's all this is. World War III is still very much happening. All of the rub about peace talks in Ukraine, it's complete deception, okay? And I'm telling you right now, I've been right about the tariffs being postponed. Remember when I said that it seemed as though that I don't even think they wrote anything down. They're just going to keep postponing this. They thought that Canada would capitulate, but we didn't. I told you that the Epstein thing was going to be a joke. I told you that the markets were going to crash. I told you that the Ukrainian peace thing was really just a Trojan horse so that the United States could get into Ukraine, and eventually that's going to metastasize into that aspect of Ukraine becoming NATO. That's the only point of all of this. And I have the receipts and all of the data to prove that everything that they're saying right now about wanting to make peace with the Russians is purely just for show, okay? This, in particular, is the biggest tell. Mike Waltz, the guy who wants Ukraine to lower its draft age to 18, okay? He's been banging on this for the longest time. He's wanted them to lower the draft age to 18. Why? Why does the United States demand that Europe up its military spend to an extra $1 trillion a year? Is it just because they're buying U.S. weapons and it's going to stimulate the economy a little bit? Maybe. But if you're the Russians looking at this, and this is why the Russians are not celebrating in the way that you think they would be on Russian media. I keep my finger on the pulse of all forms of media. This is what I pretty much do now 24/7. I watch all forms of media. Right wing, left wing, chicken wing, I watch it all. And I can tell you that the Russians are being very reserved in their celebrations about this cessation of arms flows to Ukraine, which, based on a contact that I spoke with today, has already recommenced. They've already restarted weapons shipments once again. This is their standard protocol. What they do is they make a big public display of something which is going to be in line with their mandate, with their constituents, their political platform, and say, hey, look, we stopped weapon shipments to Ukraine, we're stopping intelligence sharing. And indeed, there's an element of that which is trying to bring the Ukrainians to heel, but they've already recommenced weapon shipments, okay? And that's going to become apparent in the coming days ahead. So the war is still escalating on that front. In fact, they're already starting to threaten sanctions against Russia once again, who's saying that they're not going to commit to any sort of ceasefire under the current conditions. Now, back to this. Mike Waltz saying he wants to drop the Ukraine draft age to 18. Well, why is J.D. Vance calling for, basically criticizing Zelensky for conscription when the National Security Advisor is wanting these guys to be all in for democracy? Now, Ukraine has actually now made some changes in the last few days, and suddenly the Americans are back on board. The Ukrainians have made some changes along the lines of trying to groom, it's probably the best word, unfortunately, groom young people for military service. The West is not done with the exploitation of Ukrainian human resources, unfortunately. And what they're going to do is they're going to use this deal as a Trojan horse for security guarantees, right? Which the Russians aren't going to like that. The Russians are not going to like the fact that the Americans are trying to encourage the Ukrainians to drop their draft age to 18. They're not going to like the fact that they're suggesting that this deal is going to be an implicit security guarantee, which is exactly what Trump said, right? They're not going to like the fact that they're wanting the Europeans to arm to the tune of $1 trillion in spending, all right? So all of this points towards war. It's just that the United States has bigger fish to fry, and that is China. Now, when you are receding in your sphere of influence, what do? You cannibalize your friends and family. You basically go for the low-hanging fruit because you need a better deal. So Trump, in an attempt to get a better deal, who's he going for? He's going for Greenland, Canada, Mexico, probably going to do Venezuela. That's probably on the chopping block too at some point. That's going to be probably the easiest money to go for is Venezuela and their massive oil deposits that they have. And so you basically see a reversion then to a more regionally bound form of imperialism as opposed to a power projection one. The United States, basically, the credit card has run out. They're repatriating the gold. I mean, that in itself is proof that the empire is collapsing, that they're bringing back all the gold, okay? Because they know that the credit card is about to expire, the global reserve currency credit card. And when foreigners start to divest, and foreigners own a lot of the U.S. stock market, when they start to divest, that thing's going to crash precipitously. And that is when you're going to see, what is that old saying? When the tide goes out, you can see who's naked. Well, that's what you're going to see. This is why the socioeconomic realities don't match what we're seeing with the record high stock market, because the money being made is going outside the country because it's foreigners investing in it. It's just a bubble, okay? So that's why, you know, you have derelict neighborhoods throughout North America and collapsing infrastructure, even though you have the stock market at all-time highs, because that money is not actually being invested into the United States. So they want to encourage mobilization in Europe. Trump is saying that the globalists are behind the sell-off, and to a degree, they most certainly are, in the sense that if you were somebody who had a lot of money and you didn't like Trump, you could just start selling stocks. If you're a country who didn't like Trump and is heavily invested in the US stock market, as is many European countries, you could take that money out and start pumping the euro, okay, which is what they're doing, which is why a lot of the European stock markets are starting to bubble up right now, while the American one contracts, okay? So a lot of that money is now coming home to roost. China is stockpiling. Another report has come out that indicates, and I'm going to read you all the details of that they are basically amassing all of the raw strategic reserves. They're fortifying, they're shoring everything up. They are building massive reserves of grain and oil and various metals that they might need in a decoupled world, because they learned from Russia's mistakes. If the United States starts and continues this sanctions war with China, okay, and then of course, you know, all hell's going to break loose. But understand that nothing quite exemplifies what I'm saying as the fact that the United States has only imposed 15% tariffs on China, but is imposing 25% tariffs on its nearest ally. Okay, that is that regional imperialism in a nutshell. Because if it was really about, if they were really being fair about it, obviously they would be tariffing the Chinese a lot more. Now one could say, well, that would cause everything in Walmart to, you know, go up in price commensurately, but it's the perfect example of how this regional cannibalization of your allies basically takes priority over your peer adversaries. Biden, Soros, that camp of gangsters, they want to fight they want to fight the people with nukes. Okay, Trump wants to gobble up all the easy pickings. That's what it's about. In an attempt to kind of shore everything up, consolidate, get everything integrated, streamlined in the interests of corporate America. That's what that's about. Now, in terms of the fentanyl issue, that's a complete bullshit issue. All you got to do to disprove that is ask yourself this question. Why doesn't China have a fentanyl problem? The Chinese, you know, they had opium problems back in the day, and that was largely something that was weaponized against them, okay? Why do the Chinese not have a fentanyl problem? That's where it's coming from, right? So you have to ask yourself, and this is part of the problem with our scapegoating entitlement culture, is that we don't want to take responsibility for jack shit. Why is it that other countries in the world aren't struggling with fentanyl to the degree that Canada and the United States are? And we struggle with it as much as you guys do. Trust me, I used to work in that field, and I can tell you that it is endemic. Not only that, but crystal meth, all the cheap drugs that get you really, really high for extended periods of time. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the problem with our society? Okay, it has nothing to do with fentanyl, and it's nothing to do with border security, especially along the Canadian front. It has everything to do with this economic contraction in the United States, pulling its head back into its shell, turtling in and getting ready to weather the coming storm, which is 100% World War III, a focus on the Pacific, a focus on the Middle East, and a delegation of responsibilities in the Western theater to the Europeans. Now, Giorgia Meloni, Italian Prime Minister, said that they want to bring Ukraine under Article 5. You have stormtroopers. You have the UK, who is going to be providing some troops. You have France, who is going to be providing nuclear cover and nuclear weapons sharing and provide people a nuclear umbrella, okay? Now they're proposing an integrated air protection zone over Ukraine. This is all stuff that the Russians have vehemently said that they're not going to be in support of. They're not going to sign on to this. They're not going to tolerate peacekeepers inside Ukraine. Now, Trump is making a very brazen commitment when he says that our non-security guarantees are as good as security guarantees, because that's something you kind of have to back up, right? Like if you're saying that you're going to put private companies who are Americans on the ground in Ukraine, of which there are already thousands, I should say, and this is something people forget, like as if there's no American companies there already who've probably been bombed, so just because they're there doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a security guarantee, but that's how they're trying to sell it, okay? Now, it could just be, well, they're just trying to make a little bit of money on the side. If that's the case, then that's a rather iniquitous point of view, which isn't consistent with Trump wanting to be just a peacemaker. If they wanted to be a peacemaker, they would not be trying to push the Europeans into going into war mobilization mode and lower the draft age for Ukraine and pushing for this deal, which most people think is economically unviable anyways. So it doesn't make a lot of sense. What makes sense is that this is a world war. It's something that supersedes Trump. It's something that, regardless of who the president is going to be a problem in the future. And it's a multipolar world. And we just have to deal with the fact that this is the reality. The Greenland thing, the Golden Dome thing, Canada is now going to be building Arctic military bases. The Golden Dome and the idea of, the Star Wars program being resurrected from the Reagan era, that's what Trump is going to do, an Iron Dome for the United States in order to intercept nuclear missiles from Russia. Do you think that's going to sit well with the Russians? Is that dovish? It's not dovish at all. It's incredibly hawkish, okay? So people need to stop being so naive about these things. Maybe Trump sincerely means well and the guy's doing 10,000 things on a whim, and maybe Mike Waltz and Rubio and these guys behind the scenes are really the ones who are kind of pulling the strings at the behest of who knows. But that doesn't mean you can just be naive and blinkered to the reality of the situation, which is that what Trump is doing in his coordination of this so-called ceasefire that he's trying to broker is actually only going to make the problem much, much worse down the road. Now, Biden, it would have been worse probably sooner, okay? He probably would have started nuclear war sooner if Kamala would have won. So I'm not saying for a second that, it would have been better in that direction either. I'm just saying that when you're telling the Europeans that you need to invest all this money and that you're going to tacitly support them putting peacekeepers and doing these air defense zones in France, putting nuclear weapons everywhere, you're setting up a disastrous situation. Okay, that's period, point blank. That's all there is to that. Okay, now that I've spent 18 minutes doing the high-level overview, let's get into the nitty-gritty and the details, okay? Now, this is a SpaceX rocket that blew up. Just have a little intermission here, a little cool-down period. SpaceX rocket had to shut down a bunch of flights in certain places. I don't think Elon is going to claim this one was DEI, but who knows? That's my political joke for today. That's all I got for you. For those of you who are looking for rage bait, you're looking to be manipulated. That's all I'll say. There's a lot of frauds in this independent media game who only want to piss you off so that they can make a lot of money, pump their political ideology for whatever sort of institute that they silently work for. And I can tell you right now, I'm a bona fide independent thinker. I've turned down my invitations to the inner circle, and I've basically told them that you can keep the land. I'm gonna have the view. I prefer the view than the land because I like truth, and I like to just be prepared for what's coming. And that's the only real way you can really predict things with the degree of accuracy that I do is to be apolitical. That's the secret sauce. And that's why guys like Celente, who typically make very accurate trend forecasts, are so good at what they do, is because, you know, he sees the forest for the trees. Okay, here's the other thing. 240,000, right? 240,000 Ukrainians. Now, what's her face? Catherine Levitt, the Trump spokeswoman, she said that the 240,000 Ukrainians that Trump is going to revoke their legal status, that was fake news. And it very well could be, okay? But it could also be bundled into some back channel negotiations, because the Ukrainians, they would love to get these people back. About 30% of these people, I believe, and now this might be different for the United States, but 35% of all refugees, Ukrainian refugees, are male. And that's a lot of soldiers. And you can bet that they're not going to be looked too highly of when they return. So this could be a part of some back channel deal that they're going to be deporting Ukrainians. Now, I'm not sure how well that would go over in the United States, but considering they're doing forced deportations of illegal immigrants right now, it probably wouldn't be too hard to catch them in the dragnet and for people to not notice that much. But this is the thing. This is what people need to understand. They're still going to exploit. I actually feel really bad for the Ukrainian people, because they're not only having their industry and their resources, they would be an incredibly prosperous country, probably one of the most prosperous in Europe, were it not the front, were it not the frontier of conflict between East and West. But they're having the flower of their youth destroyed by this war, and they're having all their resources basically leached off of them. So they're being completely destroyed at the expense of the transatlantic interests. And Lindsey Graham has said as much, that, hey, this is the best investment we made. You know, they bleed and we give them money, right? So anyways, that's what you can perhaps look forward to hearing, and that's right in line with this whole thing right here, okay? Hybrid warfare has been ramping up. There's a good map. I'll post a link to it in the description below if I remember, of all of the Russian hybrid attacks. This is only attacks by Russia. I'm sure there's many in the other direction, of course. If you could probably fill this entire map of in and around Moscow, from Moscow to Georgia, of attacks on Russian infrastructure. But this is hybrid attacks that have happened in the past couple years, and they're ramping up. They're becoming more frequent. So that would be drone attacks. It would be sabotage, you know, fires in factories, undersea cables cut. So this war is definitely ramping up, okay? So there's been an emergency meeting in Brussels. Europe is planning $841 billion in weapons contributions, not just for Ukraine, but rearmament. Because Trump is now saying that if you don't meet your NATO quota, which is 2% of your GDP to be spent on military, then you might not be protected by us under Article 5. Now, I've stated why that doesn't matter probably like a year ago. And it doesn't matter because the intermarium countries, the countries that Russia is most likely to attack, Finland, the Baltic states, Poland, Romania, all these countries already spend way more than the 2% cutoff for NATO, okay? So it really only pertains to maybe a fraction of the countries, and they're all starting to spend more anyways, so really just more empty threats and bluster. Norway, independently, has decided that it's going to contribute this year $8 billion USD. That's little old Norway is going to contribute $8 billion. And all of these other countries now, because they can't do it as a collective with the EU, because I believe it was the Czech Republic who decided that, or was it Slovakia? It might have been Slovakia and Hungary who declined to participate in this, and I guess they can veto it, and that means it doesn't go through. So you have countries now entering into security guarantees, independent security guarantees for Ukraine, and just unilaterally doing it that way. Europe is contemplating forming an integrated air protection zone. This will be policed by 120 fighter jets, and it could be deployed to secure the skies from Russian attacks on Kiev and western Ukraine, according to a plan drawn up by military experts. This is from The Guardian, so it's as legit in the mainstream as you're going to get. At least you know they're thinking about it. There are reports that Sky Shield, is what they're calling it, would be a European-led air protection zone operated separately from NATO to halt Russian cruise missile and drone attacks. And because Article 6, like I expounded upon a few days ago, which basically stipulates that if an attack happens outside a NATO country, but NATO armies are involved, it doesn't necessarily lead to the triggering of Article 5, thus sparing the prospect of thermonuclear war. The Guardian reports that Sky Shield will be a European-led air protection zone operated separately from NATO to halt Russian cruise missile and drone attacks on cities and infrastructure, potentially operating as a part of a truce in the sky proposed by Volodymyr Zelensky. And he got quite the reception today when he went to, I think it was Brussels. I think that's where he was today. It would cover Ukraine's 3 operating nuclear power plants in the cities of Odessa and Lviv, or Lvov as the Russians call it, but not the front line or the east of the country. And according to a newly published paper, it could achieve greater military, political, socioeconomic impact than 10,000 European ground troops. So they basically want a no-fly zone. Right now, this is obviously very problematic because the margin for error is very high. This is a very gray area. If the Russians are still engaged in ground hostilities on Ukrainians and they maybe attempt to attack something which is near the front and that is intercepted, then that's going to basically lose them that ground-based battle. So they're going to have to take out whatever it was that shot down their missile, which is going to pit them against Europe. And then this is going to turn into a shooting match between Europe and Russia. Okay? I think what we might see if this deal falls through, we're going to see China start to more actively arm Russia. And if this was about driving a wedge between Russia and China, okay, the last thing you would want to do is start a trade war with China while these negotiations were happening. And I don't understand the rhyme or reason for that. Maybe there is a reason, but all this is going to compel the Chinese to do is give Russia direct military support, because what else do they have to lose at this point? They're selling off their U.S. treasuries, okay? Everybody's repatriating gold. Like, the gig's almost up. Okay, Macron is prepping nuclear weapons for Russia. In fact, he threatened to use them. According to Sergei Lavrov, of course, it's a threat against Russia, Lavrov says. If he sees us as a threat and says that it's necessary to use a nuclear weapon, is preparing to use a nuclear weapon against Russia, of course it is a threat. So Macron is talking up the possibility of deploying nuclear weapons throughout Europe that are not under the control of the Americans out of fear that they won't come to their aid. Now, again, I think a lot of this is just talk. I don't think the Americans are ready to fully sever their responsibilities in the transatlantic theater just yet. And remember what Pete Hegseth said when he first met with European leaders and the Ukrainians. He said that we're willing to provide a nuclear umbrella for Europe, but you have to do the conventional fighting. We no longer can spare the planes and all that stuff. We got to focus on China, and we got to keep quietly sending Israel whatever they want in terms of weapons, and nobody's going to criticize it, even though there's no mineral deal for Israel. But I guess they're a special case for some reason that nobody can explain. Something to do with like religious things that happened thousands of years ago. I don't know. It's weird. Weird. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said that Europe must enter into an arms race with Russia and win it. So there goes the peace dividend. But it's great for military stocks in the UK. Now, Pete Hegseth, surprisingly, has said that there never has been a stronger alliance with the UK. He met with John Healey, who's the British Defence Minister today, and he had very positive things to say. Now, I'm not sure if he's just really new to this, so he's trying to be very polite and congenial, and maybe was coming off as, I don't know, being a little bit too passive in the way that he was talking up his counterpart. But anyways, he said that the UK has a stronger alliance with the US than ever before, and of course, the UK met Zelensky with open arms. So this could just be a classic case of good cop, bad cop at the end of the day. I know this part of the video is getting a little bit boring, but it's the details that we have to cover because this is a very complicated situation, guys. So he is basically meeting with him, and they're both kind of reiterating their support for one another, and it appears as though they're on the same page in everything except Ukraine. So I think this too is a tell that whatever we're seeing with this drama playing out with Zelensky is probably for the most part smoke and mirrors. Now there is some rumors that they're kind of holding that sword of Damocles over his head and saying that if you don't sign this paper, we're going to find somebody else who will. The problem with that is that if you get rid of Zelensky, there could be a power vacuum. You don't know if the next person is going to be able to hold it down. You don't know if they're going to be well received by the public. There are talks that there are certain people who could potentially step into the role. Zaluzhny, who was the previous commander, who has some pretty questionable ideas and murals and pictures on his wall, which we won't get into today. He has a lot of support of the Ukrainian people, or at least a good portion of them, and he is on Zelensky's side. Poroshenko is another one, but again, none of these guys, I think, even want to run. So, I mean, why would you, who would want to take on that responsibility? First, you got to find somebody who, would actually do better than Zelensky, and then you got to find somebody who's going to actually want the job, which is not as easy as a lot of people think, okay? So next week, Rubio and I believe it's Kellogg and Walz are going to be meeting in Riyadh with their Ukrainian counterparts and trying to get this deal signed. That's what's going to happen. And I think once that happens, then you're going to quietly see the spigot turn on again. The weapons are going to start flowing. The intelligence is going to start being shared. As we speak, Ukraine is getting rocked by Russian missiles. Okay, it's been happening all day. There are 8 bombers in the air. Kinzhal missiles, sea-based missiles are hitting targets all throughout Ukraine. And it's looking as though they're not getting the intelligence that they might need to counteract those attacks. But again, only believe basically none of what you hear, half of what you see. France is doing recon missions around Kaliningrad for some reason. And so France is kind of trying to do what they can to fill in the knowledge gap and the intel gap, ISR gap for Ukraine in the wake of the U.S. pulling their, at least saying that they pulled their intelligence. But, the Russians aren't celebrating that, which tells me that whatever they're saying they did probably isn't as significant as they're saying. Ukraine is going to be, like I said, grooming their younger population for conscription, likely at the behest of the United States and Mike Walz. Trump is going to lift the ban on Ukrainian weapons if a deal is reached. Based on what I'm hearing, the weapons are already flowing once again. According to U.S. officials, including U.S. presidential Donald Trump's advisor on Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, they secretly contacted Vladimir Zelensky after the altercation in the White House with the American leader to point out the need to stabilize relations. So this is what was reported on CNN. And now, once again, Scott Bessent, who's the U.S. Treasury Secretary, has said that the U.S. will impose sanctions against Russian energy if it helps achieve a ceasefire in Ukraine. Who knows if that will even be enforced, is the thing. It's one thing to impose a sanction. It's another as to whether it will even be enforced, okay? What else we got going on here on the Ukraine front? So France is offering its intelligence, some more AI imagery there. Okay, now we're into the realm of finance, it looks like. That's a little premature. We'll save that for later in the video. This is the warm welcome that Zelensky received in Brussels today from all of his comrades. I need a sip of Tim Hortons here. I bet you Americans are going to miss this. I can't stand Tim Hortons. You know, it's the only game in town. Every time I get one of these coffees in the morning, you guys probably can share my grief here, but the thing always spills, like 50% of the cups. Like, this is your only job, Tim Hortons, is to make a damn good cup. McDonald's has you beat in this department. It took them years to change the lids to something that wasn't from the 80s, and it still leaks. Piece of dog Anyways, why do I go there? Why do I torment myself with that crap? Okay, so now they're threatening to embargo Iran. That's the next big thing, okay? So, special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. Let's see what he has to say today.
I think that the president has said that there's a path back, and President Zelensky has demonstrated that he's intent on that good faith. I think that the president has said that there's a path back, and President Zelensky has demonstrated that he's intent on that good faith path back. He's apologized. He said he's grateful. He said that he wants to work towards peace. By the way, that's ultimately the goal here. We're
okay, come on. I'm not listening to this shit anymore. You know that they have some sort of back alley deal going on that we don't even know about, man. The truth is probably way stranger than fiction. You don't just, go from we're not supporting you at all to all of a sudden, oh yeah, he apologized. Everything's good now. Yeah, it's all good now. No. Something's going on there, all right? So Marco Rubio decided to go on Fox News, and I think he was talking about, he was talking about Ukraine or Israel or something like that, and he had his Ash Wednesday cross on his head. Now, I was a Christian growing up, and, I got the, whatever you call that, on Ash Wednesday, and I just thought it was kind of weird that he did this. It seemed like it was kind of pandering, and they're definitely buttering us up to do some crazy shit. Okay, this is the guy who is basically spearheading the campaign in the Middle East that will see likely more genocide being committed in the Gaza Strip and likely take us to a war with the Iranians over this oil embargo that's coming up, and it appears as though shit's hitting the fan in Syria today. A new civil war is breaking out. Now, they've shipped so many weapons to Israel in the past couple weeks. I mean, they're planning for something big, all right? And to me, this just smacks of, hey, we're one of you. We're not going to do some really demonic shit right away. I'll do it and say whatever I have to. And that's what they're doing. So, yeah, the U.S. is mulling plans to disrupt Iran's oil by halting vessels at sea. Now, they're trying to do this in a way where they're trying to delegate the responsibility onto other nations to do it. So the U.S. doesn't have to confront Iran directly. But I guess we'll see. There's been a lot of bomber exercises, not only in the Middle East, but also throughout Europe, in fact. So we're seeing a lot of this activity, bombers being escorted by fighter jets, and a lot of it in the Middle East as well. They've been sending bombers down there every once in a while, possibly to try to get a bead on get them to turn on their radars or something. I don't know what it is. It's something preparatory for war, that's for sure. Okay? So I'm not going to go into great detail about that particular issue. This is what Trump had to say today, a very strongly worded message for Hamas. I'm not going to read all of it, but, incredibly one-sided, as is usual. I mean, the Israelis are the only victims, blah, blah, blah. If you do not give back the hostages, you're dead. Make a smart decision. Release the hostages now, or they will be held to pay later. And, this is what they've sort of been secretly getting ready in the background as this whole Ukrainian charade is ongoing. This is the situation unfolding in Syria, which is so complicated, I don't even know who the hell's fighting who anymore. It's just everybody's fighting. The Alawites fighting the Jolani brigades, and the Turks are in there, and the Israelis are in there, and it's just one big cluster, F-U-C-K. So, you know, some things are never going to change. This is the surge in gold exports, okay? This is a great graph to show you the comparison. So 2020, COVID, Russian sanctions, not sure what happened in 2023, and here we are today. Okay, this is the billions of dollars of gold imports into the COMEX and other places from abroad. So that's pretty serious. Now, China has some very strongly worded messages for the United States. This is the Chinese embassy in U.S. Twitter account. They said, if war is what the U.S. wants, be it a tariff war, a trade war, or any other type of war, we are ready to fight until the end. And in fact, Pete Hegseth has responded in kind and said, okay, well, we're ready too. I'm not so sure about that, but that's what they claim. Now, China is stockpiling, and they're accelerating their annual stockpiling of strategic fuels, food, and other commodities. They're claiming that we will move faster to fulfill the yearly task of stockpiling strategic goods as we work to expand the scale of the reserves. The world's largest consumer of raw materials, China is very secretive about the size and extent of its vast networks of reserves. You see, really, this is a macrocosm of prepping, right? Country has a strategic reserve. You have a little mini strategic reserve. In fact, I did a video on that very thing. Responsible governments have strategic reserves. Here, we have crypto reserves, and we have some oil reserves and some gold reserves, and we have some strategic stockpiles of medicine and a few other things. And I think we have a strategic cheese reserve, if I'm not mistaken. We, as in North America, because now that we're going to be the 51st state pretty soon. I probably lost some of my Canadian viewers there. I'm just being facetious. But you get the point, is that governments do it. They're the biggest preppers. They spend the most on defense. So you should be, investing a lot in self-defense. And all of the other strategic reserves, you want to try to emulate that in your own preparedness. They're saying that the analysts estimate that their reserves contain millions of tons of metals, grains, meat, and crude oil. It was actually Stalin, I believe, who in his bunkers, and I know the North Koreans do this as well, they store massive amounts of raw materials like metals that you might need to rebuild. In fact, Kim Jong-un has heavy equipment inside his bunkers to dig himself out of the bunker. When we had our guest Bradley Garrett on the channel, he explained that in great detail. So these are incredibly advanced preparations that are underway in other countries that I don't think we have something that equates to that here. They're saying that we'll steadily advance the construction of storage facilities for grain, petroleum, and other commodities. Right now, they have 290 million barrels of oil that they've accumulated. I'm not sure how that compares to the U.S. I'm pretty sure the U.S. has more than that. However, it should be known that these numbers are very misleading. Everything we know about the Chinese, you almost want to, it's just like, when you ask your girlfriend how many dudes she slept with, you want to take that number and probably multiply it by quite a few, okay? Nowadays, anyways. And that's what it is with the Chinese. So, they're probably, their military size, the amount of gold they have, the amount of nuclear weapons they have, the size of their strategic reserves, all of this stuff is completely classified. And the official accounting of it is nowhere near what the actual amounts actually are, okay? And anybody who is in intelligence will tell you that they go by the official figures, they report these official figures, but the reality is they're likely a lot worse. So we now have a tariff war with the Chinese that is underway. And the Chinese are cutting undersea cables to Taiwan. Now, let me just pull up my map here. So the Chinese, and right now today there was discovered 11 of those balloons were seen around Taiwan, those surveillance balloons. So 11 of them were discovered around Taiwan. Such gray zone maneuvers, previously described, are short of an act of war by the Taiwanese, who are now coordinating with Ukrainian companies for guidance on a potential Chinese invasion. So there's coordination happening there. But over the last 9 weeks, most people don't know this, but the Chinese vessels have cut 5 underwater cables. All of them are disguised as civilian vessels with civilian crews, which the Chinese government has instructed to carry out this campaign. Now, I'm not sure where these cables are going to and from. If they're going to the Chinese mainland, it makes you wonder why wouldn't you just disconnect them from the Chinese mainland, unless these are likely cables, I presume, that are perhaps going to the Philippines or maybe some of these other islands somewhere. It's hard to say. Or possibly even, Japan. It's really hard to say. But that's what's going on. So things are ramping up in the Pacific once again. Talked about did I talk about all this stuff? Oh yeah, I talked about all this stuff. Okay. Let's keep going here. What else do we got? Yeah, it's been a long couple days. My friends. Okay, so the NASDAQ now below its 200-day moving average, as I indicated. South Korea is grappling with gold bar shortage as supply constraints bite. So they're running out of gold. And that can only mean that the price of gold is going to continue to go up, but it's still heavily manipulated with the paper markets. Now, the strategic crypto reserve that everybody was excited about, because these guys actually had the audacity to believe and request that the US government use money that doesn't exist, use debt to buy Bitcoin, which is the dumbest thing you could possibly do. I mean, it's certainly one of the most immoral things you could possibly do. Maybe it does make fiscal sense in the short term, to buy and then sell it right away or something. But yeah, so this is what people are now getting. Basically, in addition, the executive order establishes a U.S. digital asset stockpile, consisting of digital assets other than Bitcoin forfeited in criminal or civil proceedings, and of course, Bitcoin. The government will not acquire additional assets for the stockpile beyond those obtained through forfeiture proceedings. So basically, this is what they're going to get from criminal activity, and that's it. The government's not going to use debt to go and buy more. So the price of Bitcoin didn't spike in the way that a lot of people thought it would. Now, this could just be a first step. You really have to ask, though, why wouldn't they sell it? Why are they holding on to it? Are they not wanting to crash crypto? Are they wanting to keep that going? There's definitely an ulterior motive there, okay? I think what this does, this at least provides a floor, probably somewhere in the 70,000 range for Bitcoin, so long as the government holds on to this and never sells it. That's going to give some credence to this crypto thing. And of course they need it in order to detract from gold, because they want the price of gold to be reduced, because that's where real money goes to, is precious metals, okay? This I kind of found was pretty cool. I as a prepper, I'm not averse to technology like some are. And I can tell you, I've been wanting something like this for a long time. And basically, what it is, it's a drone deployment system for your vehicle. Okay, now, I don't understand how they could deploy it well. Like, let's just watch that again. This seems to defy the physics of wind. But maybe if it's held in there, if it's like clamped in there and it only releases when it's getting ready to launch, when the propellers start to spin fast enough. It's pretty cool. Like, if you could mount that on the top of your car and have a drone that just with the push of a button would deploy, and then it would show you in your display, what the drone was seeing, that would be pretty cool. That would be some Mad Max shit right there. you know, we can still have fun. Speaking of fun, this was, I don't get political, but this one, every time I watch it, every time I look at it, I laugh at it. People living their normal lives, just, you know, a nice traditional family, not at all bothered by the horrors of the world. And what's this? What's this? Well, you can't see it. Oh, you can't see the word. It says liberals. This guy just begrudging the trad fam. I think that's hilarious. There's probably a little bit of truth to that. It's not as simple, but there's definitely a little bit of truth to that. Anyways, my friends, that's all I got for you today. I'll probably see you later on today. Once again, sorry I'm releasing these videos on an alternate schedule. Right now I'm doing them later at night, and I usually release them early in the morning. So if you want to support the channel and all I do, check out CanadianPreparedness.com and go check out some of our other videos that are not all doom and gloom. Okay, we do a lot of prepping stuff on the channel, and I would encourage you, take this opportunity while we're not in a state of acute crises with the nuclear thing. Take this opportunity to start making some long-term goals with preparedness. You know, get that land, get that homestead built out. You know, do what you got to do, because you don't want to do it when everybody else is scrambling to do it, because that's when everything is going to cost 3 times as much. All right, guys, take care. See you on the flip side.